Welcome to this edition of Africa 360, where we scour the continent for news and views with a distinctly African perspective. I'm Chris Maruleng, inviting you to see Africa like you've never seen it before. This week on Africa 360, it's a historic moment between the United Nations and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Security Council resolved to escalate its force in the eastern DRC from peacekeeping to all-out offensive attack, and the infamous M23 rebels are the direct target. But is the DRC yet again on the brink of all-out war? Conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a line that has been used for decades, that we've become all too familiar with. But is there hope on the horizon for this war-ravaged country? Well, the Democratic Republic of Congo is the largest country on the continent, and it's quite literally the heart of Africa. It's situated in the center of the continent. Since independence in 1960, this geographic giant has been led by only 4 leaders. After the assassination of the first democratic leader, Patrice Lumumba, here on our visuals, Mobutu Sese Seko ruled for 32 years and renamed the country Zaire. Then the general Laurent Kabila, who was succeeded by his son Joseph after dying mysteriously, then came into power. Joseph Kabila's leadership was legitimized when he was democratically elected in elections in 2011. While its name may have changed a few times, fighting in the DRC has remained a constant feature of this country. There's still instability, particularly in the east, and this plays a host to a number of rebel movements, notably the infamous 23rd of March movement, better known as the M23 rebels. Seen as a regional threat, Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Uganda, and now South Africa continue to play a role in the ongoing internal conflict along with the United Nations. But many believe it's the country's vast mineral wealth that attracts its neighbors. If the country stabilizes, it's believed it could be one of the most powerful on the African continent. Since 1998, at least 5.4 million people have died in the DRC conflict after nearly 2 decades, and the largest United Nations force that is in Africa. The eastern DRC remains unstable. Africa 360's producer Lindsay Schutel looks at the international community's latest attempts to end the conflict there.
That's the mandate of United Nations Resolution 2980, shoot to kill. Billed as the first ever offensive combat force, the UN Intervention Brigade of the Democratic Republic of the Congo is now authorized to neutralize and disarm rebels and foreign armed groups. M23 tops the target list. The United Nations first entered the country in 1999 to monitor the ceasefire. But the organization mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or MONUC, brought about little change, except a name change to MONUSCO in 2010. The UN has certainly poured in resources. Since initial authorization, the intervention cost $8.73 billion. The cost of keeping UN forces going is at least $140 million a year. This latest intervention will cost an additional $1.4 billion. With more than 20,000 uniformed personnel and an additional 4,000 ground staff, it's the largest UN mission in the world. The United Nations now blames the DRC's neighbors for the ongoing instability. They've outright accused Rwanda of funding and arming the M23 rebels as a proxy force against the Hutu rebel group, the FDLR, also hiding in the volatile east. Rwanda denies this.
Rwanda is getting annoyed with that, and we remain firm by saying that we have no interest in arming M23. We are not doing that. And definitely, if we were doing that, they could not go back the way they are go back or be defeated the way they are defeated. We cannot invest in a project that is not winning terrain.
So then the biggest thing to come out of the United Nations mandate, because this is an historical mandate, it's the first time the UN is saying go in and attack M23, but they're also putting the blame at Rwanda's feet. What does Rwanda say about that?
Of course, we can also say that UN has failed there, and UN need to blame somebody. So Rwanda has been a scapegoat in this matter. Not many people will hear that because we say it with one voice, and many voices, including the media, the NGOs, are blaming us. But ask them for solid proof. If Rwanda is really there, why can they take even satellite pictures of Rwanda soldiers fighting?
The DRC says the evidence speaks for itself.
The role of those countries have been documented by the UN, by everybody. Everybody knows. Because in today's world of media and intelligence, you cannot fool anyone. Their role has been heavily documented. And we in Congo, we had never crossed a border to attack anybody.
Parties on both sides have stressed that a military solution won't solve the DRC's ongoing woes. A political solution is on the cards, with talks underway in Kampala. Both the M23 and President Joseph Kabila may be at the table, but opposition parties have boycotted the negotiations. The United Nations mission may bring an initial ceasefire, but it won't bring long-term peace. Lindsay Schutel, Johannesburg.
Well, that was Lindsay Schutel there. Do join us after the break as we put these questions and more to analysts, the South African Army, and none other than the M23 rebels themselves. Don't miss this, and it's only on Africa 360. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Africa 360. Our focus is on the Democratic Republic of Congo and the latest international effort to end the violence there. We ask just how viable this latest UN mission is, joined by defense analyst Helmoed Heitman, who talks to us from our studios in Pretoria. And joining me here in Johannesburg is Brigadier General Xolani Mabanga, who is spokesperson of the South African National Defence Force, and Ramazani Polepole, who is the representative of DRC's M23 group here in South Africa. But before we get into our conversation, let's hear from the people of the DRC.
In Congo, we don't recognize M23 as rebels. They are not rebels. Those people, they are from Rwanda. They are supporting what Kagame is doing on the eastern of the DRC, stealing the mineral and whatever. Those one who send those soldiers, they know the real problem. The problem in the Congo, it is illegitimacy of power.
Let me start with you, Mr. Polepole. The M23, this is an accusation that we hear about your organization often, that in actual fact, you don't represent an authentic movement of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but your interests are that of acting as a proxy for Rwanda. Is there any truth to this statement?
I believe that is not truth, because as M23, I don't see any of Rwanda group, Rwanda soldier, or any representative of Kagame in M23. Is the son of Congo that are organizing the M23. M23 is not, doesn't have anyone from Rwanda, anyone from any other country. We are Congolese. We are the son of the South Kivu and other parts of Congo that are forming M23.
But here, Mr. Polepole, I speak under correction, but the United Nations have actually indicated that they are also of the view that the M23 are directly supported, albeit even funded, by Rwanda. Are you denying what the United Nations has been saying? I'm denying that because there's no evidence that can prove that Rwanda is supporting M23. The first things I'll tell you, you must know, if Rwanda was backing up M23, I don't believe that the government of Kinshasa will be there by now. Even Kabila himself knows that if we were backed up by Rwanda, we'll be far by now. But
we are not having any support from Rwanda. And if they'll say in human, in soldiers, Rwanda is sending soldiers, this is based by morphology. Because yes, you see M23 is military groups much Tutsis. And we know that in Rwanda, neighboring countries, is got Tutsi. And this, can I finish please? And this make believe the UN that after having wrong information, that the M23 has got Rwanda soldiers within it. But where is evidence?
Very well, Mr. Polepole. Let's leave that for now. So if we accept then, for now, as you have indicated, that you are an authentic movement of the Democratic Republic of Congo, what does the M23 want? And why has the M23 been engaged in violence, accusations of engaging in raping, pillaging, and engaging in the destabilization of the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo?
I just mentioned it now that all reports that are coming from UN, they are wrongly reported.
But what does the M23 want?
The aim of M23 is to restore the dignity of Congo and Congolese people. So M23 is just legitimated by fighting for the right of Congolese to
fighting for the rights of the people of Congo. If that is the case, then General Mabanga, the interesting thing is that the United Nations has deployed, in what appears to be a historic move, a force that is not just engaging in peacekeeping operations against people like the M23, but war-fighting operations, a Chapter 8. Why is that if they're just there to fight for the will and the cause of the people of the East, as is claimed here today?
We remember these things started from the SADC, when the security situation was deteriorating in the East, and then SADC decided to say that something must be done. And then that was taken over to the United Nations, and the United Nations approved that concept of an intervention brigade. Now, therefore, if the situation was stable, and if there was no threat to the security of the people, there could not have been a need to have a force being given such powers to use force in order to establish or to restore peace or to protect civilian people in the Eastern DRC. Those are the basis of the deployment of the United Nations Intervention Brigade, of which the South African National Defence Force is part of.
Fair enough. Let's bring in Mr. Heitman joining us from Pretoria. One of the key questions, therefore, is when you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, you have this grouping known as the M23. We now have this special intervention force that has been established by the United Nations, as indicated by General Mabanga. Do you believe that this force that is now in place in the east of the DRC has the capacity and indeed the wherewithal to restore peace and security to the east of the DRC?
Bluntly, no. If it was only M23 as the opposition, then yes. But there are at least a dozen other major armed groups of varying levels of training and equipment. And depending whose figures you listen to, anywhere between 4,000 up to 14,000 armed people running around in North Kivu. And in that terrain, in that size of territory, the size of Bosnia, with a population of about 6 million people, a 3-brigade intervention force with very limited mobility, with exceedingly limited reconnaissance capability, and backed up by only a 3-battalion security force, the framework brigade, is simply under strength to do the job. And that, I'm afraid, that it's just another typical of many United Nations operations, under-resourced both in troops and equipment and in funding, and it really is unlikely to achieve anything.
So, General, then why engage in such a high-risk operation in the east of the DRC if you are under-resourced and under-strength, as has been indicated by Mr. Heitman?
Well, what Mr. Heitman is saying is an analysis that he's making based on the information that he might have. But as we are aware that the situation in the Eastern DRC warranted that something else has to be done. Therefore, the equipment or the equipment of the brigade, it is based on the analysis of the factors on the ground. I may not say that they are over-equipped or they are under-equipped. But what I can say is that they are equipped in terms of the mission and the mandate that they've been given.
Equipped in terms of the mission and the mandate that's been given. Do stay with us after the break as we continue our conversation on the Democratic Republic of Congo and whether this intervention brigade established by the United Nations has any chance of success. And this is only on Africa 360. What will it take for the DRC, particularly the East, to be brought to peace?
If I knew that, I would be possibly a rich man.
We don't want to see our people, my compatriots crying, begging for things. I want my country to be good. That's all I want.
Well, those were the views from ordinary citizens in the Democratic Republic of Congo living here in South Africa. Let's take our conversation forward, and I'll start with you, Mr. Heitman. Now, we've heard views from the people on the ground from the Democratic Republic of Congo. They may be here in South Africa, but one of the key themes that keep on coming up is the fact that the DRC appears to be engaged, particularly the East, in an ongoing conflict cycle. If it is not this intervention force, as you would believe, that has the wherewithal of stemming the violence, what will it take for the DRC, particularly the East, to be brought to peace?
If I knew that, I would be possibly a rich man. These situations are always, they're like family fights. They're exceedingly difficult to resolve. I think the DRC was run by the former President Mobutu deliberately as very separate parts of a country that could never coalesce as a country. And with inadequate security forces on the ground, you've now also had various militias, bandit groups, armed smugglers, etc., getting in on the act. You've got the remnants of the former Rwandan genocidists inside the country. And really, the only way to stabilize that is for everyone to accept that there is a real problem, that Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, in fact, face real security problems or threats from the DRC, and that the forces employed in the area must be large enough to seal off the border to everybody's satisfaction. Now, that is a tall order in that terrain, in the size of the region, so absolutely possible it isn't, but with an adequate force, and it would have to be quite a bit stronger than it is, you would get close. It's easy for me to sit here and say. It would be very difficult to execute on the ground.
Now, given this fact, Mr. Polepole, the question that I must ask you directly, your assessment of this task force, which has identified the M23 amongst other rebels movements in the East as negative groups
Yeah.
and as targets, are you concerned? Are you worried about them?
First of all, I'm not worried, because when I don't believe, how can you call a group a negative force while there's established peace talk that is in Kampala, where our delegation been there since. We never withdraw them. And how can you say, when we are talking with a government, we become a partner in peace process? We are no longer a negative force.
Surely the reason why you've been identified as a negative force is because you must admit that you, through your military activities in the East, you have really played a part in the destabilization of the Eastern DRC.
You have to understand something about DRC, east of DRC. There is a problem of Rwanda rebels that are backed up by the government. And in that region,
Which government? Sorry, the Rwandan government.
Congo government.
The Congolese
the
government.
Congolese government, the Kinshasa government, the Kabila government, if I may say that. Because this comes from the genocide time, 94 genocide from Rwanda. These are people, they made their genocide in Rwanda and come to Congo. And now they found in Congo there's a race of Tutsi. And these people are Hutu, and they've got these ideas of killing and finished all the Tutsi. The UN is trying to not acknowledge that. We have a thousands of civilians that are in camps. They ran this massacre from rebel from Rwanda. That is why when we are defending our people, it was not defending them against the government of Congo directly. It was to tell the government that you cannot support this genocide group, because this genocide group cannot be supported by anyone.
Very well, Mr. Polepole. So then, you know, General Mabanga, it appears that the SNDF, the Tanzanians, and indeed the Malawians who are part of this task force have really stepped into a hornet's nest. It sounds very complicated here. You even have individuals in the East whose allegiances, and I'm sure their identification, must be very difficult, even for the SANDF, is it?
Well, we are all aware of the complex nature of the security situation in the Eastern DRC. That's an open secret that there is more than what we see, and there is more than what is said on the table. Now, if you listen very well, Mr. Polepole, then you'll find that the complexity also comes in there. Because if you remember your question asking what is the aim or the objectives of the M23, then if you come back to his last part of trying to say that what they were doing, they were to defend people from the other people, not necessarily the government forces, then you ask yourself, who poses threat to security and stability in the Eastern DRC? And that's the question that should become.
So who does then, General? Because the argument from the M23 and others is that the actual government of the DRC is the destabilizing factor. They don't view them as legitimate. So are you taking sides? One of the questions from the people from the DRC is South Africa appears to be siding with the government in Kinshasa, Mr. Kabila's government. Are you objective in this matter?
Well, you mustn't look at it from a point of view of South African National Defence Force as an independent or unilateral role player in this. This is a multinational operation, and this is a multinational mission. If the United Nations and most of the Security Council, which its main responsibility is to ensure that there's peace, stability around the world.
Yeah.
And they have identified that there is a lack of security and stability in the Eastern DRC. And certain elements have been identified to be contributing factors to that destabilization. And therefore, something has to be done in order to establish or to create conditions conducive for peace and stability to prevail.
So, Mr. Heitman, if this is the case, in conclusion, what are the key factors that you think must be considered by the United Nations, by the SANDF, who form part of this task force, as they begin to engage with these so-called negative forces in the East, based on this conversation?
I think the key factor for the UN is that it must not just clearly understand and accept, but make clear that it is understood that the problem is not just one of M23. The problem is also the former the FDLR. If you look further north, it's the Lord's Resistance Army, the Allied Democratic Forces. If you look further south, it's a Burundi National Liberation Front starting up again. It is entirely pointless to just chase after a group like M23, regardless of how you choose to characterize it, if you don't do something about the others. There is no one side that is wrong or right, and that you need a neutral force there for quite a while with enough clout to keep people separate.
Now,
as I say, easily said, not easily done.
Easily said, but not easily done. Just very quickly, General, one of the key things that has been raised is around funding. Is the South African taxpayer paying for the deployment and the presence of South African armed forces in the DRC?
The mission is not a South African National Defence Force, neither is a government of the Republic of South Africa mission, which will solely depend in terms of funding from the government of South Africa. It is a United Nations mission which is funded by the United Nations.
So let's just get this right. Who foots the bill, South Africa or the UN for SANDF forces?
It's the United Nations.
It's the United Nations. In conclusion, is there a possibility at this late stage for the M23 to consider laying down arms and going back to the negotiating table?
Laying down arms is not possible if our legitimate aims are not answered by the government, because the negotiation been established. So we show our willingness. First part, we withdraw from Goma, and I hope their meeting, it will come out with bring us back for the negotiation, because that is our claim. We've been asking, and then asking and ask it again. Kabila must come back to the table, and we must sort out the Congo issue.
Indeed, Kabila must come back to the table, and certainly all the other members involved in this highly complex cycle of conflict that is currently engulfing the East. We certainly send our best wishes to the people of the Eastern DRC, that is the long-suffering people of the Eastern DRC. That does bring us to the end of this edition of your program, Africa 360. Please do tell us your thoughts via Facebook or tweet us at A360_ENCA or email us on africa360@enca.com. Until next time, when you look forward to bringing you Africa like you've never seen it before, do take care.